Now I'm going to start with a $1 trillion question. If NATO won, if the DPR and LPR forces surrendered and the Russian army was driven back to the border, would the world be a better or a worse place? This is a practical question. You can't resolve it with abstract ideals or theories, like whether Ukraine has a sacred right to rule over the Russian speakers of the Donbass, or whether Russia is imperialist, any more than Palestinian rights can be settled by referring to the historical origins of the people of the book. The lives of millions, maybe billions of people are at stake, I will show. If the Russian army leaves Ukraine, they will all suffer and many will die. Now, if your ideals tell you that that's a good thing, if along with Madeleine Albright, you can look on the death of 500,000 Iraqi children and say it was worth it, then your ideals are wrong. If your theory tells you to arm Ukraine to the teeth and give its fascists free rein to cleanse it of Russian and Russian speakers, you're free to say that, which is a lot more freedom than we've got in speaking up against you, but you're not part of the left. Because if anyone tries to justify a monstrous and unnecessary human sacrifice on the grounds that it's for the best, you're measuring good in dollars, not bodies, and you're not part of the left, because the left stands for humans, not money. What will happen if the Russian army leaves? First, there will be a bloody racial cleansing of a third of Ukrainian territory, where 14 million Russian speakers live. You don't need an elaborate theory or analysis to see that. You just look at what's been happening. For the past 8 years, the Donbass has been under continuous and illegal military attack for no greater crime than demanding autonomy and standing up to murderers. This is not the work of a handful of rightists. It's baked into the concept of nation, which Ukraine's rulers promote and NATO supports. Stripped of elegant excuses, this holds that being ethnically Russian is incompatible with Ukrainian nationality. This is a thoroughly racist notion. Azov merely enforces what everybody promotes with a soft glove by killing and torturing those who oppose it, for which they once got nods and winks, but now they get acclaim as national heroes. The so-called left support for it is a travesty. That's also why war is not just an invasion, but a civil war. This was inevitable given the national concept. Imagine if the USA were to ban Spanish. What might happen in, let's say, California? Or suppose Canada banned French, not even outside Quebec, but in Quebec itself. The country would fall apart. What about, and that's the origin of the conflict. That's the true origin of the conflict. A suppressive concept of nation. But what about Russia itself? Maybe a NATO victory would free it of the Putin yoke. No. What NATO wants to do is install a Western puppet who will sell off Russia's resources to the highest bidder. To see this as liberation is to ignore basic facts. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the average standard of living fell to 1/5 of what it was. Over 3 million people died. Life expectancy fell by 5 years. In World War II, over 26 million Soviet citizens died. That's why Putin has such wide popular support in Russia. A pro-Western successor could only rule by terror. Like Zelensky, that great Democrat who has banned 11 opposition parties and is busy jailing their members for treason. So what about the alternatives? Let's use the right name for the alternative. It's a NATO defeat, not a Ukrainian defeat. Russia's enemy is not the people of Ukraine, but NATO, which is fighting it to the last Ukrainian. For NATO, the Ukrainian people are pawns. At stake is a deeply unjust world order that consigns 4/5 of the world to a status of economic slavery, by denying the economic sovereignty without which self-determination is an empty slogan. What exactly is so terrifying about a NATO defeat, folks? NATO is the spawn of a parasitic financial military elite that would rather destroy the world than surrender an ounce of privilege. The Western left has opposed it for 70 years in Vietnam, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. Yet now it finally faces a setback large enough to get some sense of reason into its leaders and rein it in, this same left views the prospect with horror. Why? Just look at what's happening already. Provoked by the failure of the US attempts to asphyxiate the Russian economy, quote unquote, by cutting it out of the world financial and trading system, this same system is self-destructing. The dollar monopoly of trade is disappearing. This rids the financial military elite of two weapons which have held back the global south for generations: US control of trade and US control of finance. If this was completed, it would free countries to trade as they wish. The coercive power of sanctions would be limited to supplies of high tech, of which US still has a monopoly, but the gap's rapidly being closed by China's remarkable advances. The dollar monopoly of finance is also on life support, because people are building alternative regional blocks. And if this was completed, it would free countries of the tyrannical yoke of neoliberalism. They would no longer be defenseless against smash and grab raids by rapacious Western investors whose only concern is to lay hands on their minerals, foodstuff and cheap labor at minimum cost to themselves and with maximum cost to the damage to the planet and its peoples. Countries would then be free to focus on the needs of their own people, on food security and on economic and human development and ecological development. This would further deprive the authoritarian regimes of the South, which certainly exist, of two levers that keep them in power: access to Western finance and the fear that Washington's little enforcers will punish them mercilessly if they do anything to their people. Countries would then be free to choose leaders that respect the needs of their people instead of the corrupt elites of their countries and of the United States and its allies. If you need proof, just look at Latin America. Country after country is boycotting a US summit of the Americas because it excluded Cuba and Venezuela. Look at the CELAC conference, where Mexico's López Obrador openly advocated an independent economic and political union for Latin America and the Caribbean. Look at the reactions of China's BRICS partners to Xi Jinping's proposal. They not only expand their group, but, and I quote, oppose hegemonism and power politics, resist Cold War thinking and bloc confrontation, and build a community with shared security for mankind together. Look at the volte-face of a US leadership, which, finally addressing Maduro as president, has just now offered to begin lifting illegal and punitive sanctions it was trying to use to starve the Venezuelan people into submission, not out of any moral epiphany, but simply because they need to grab some more oil, and that's the only way they can get it. So finally, why does this call for a powerful left? Because that's what I'm going to advocate, but a very different left. What should that left be like? Well, first of all, if you think that the right is part of the answer, and that's quite a widespread illusion, I suggest you wait for Ted Cruz to endorse what's going on in Latin America. It will be a long wait. I think the end times will probably come first. That's because the right fundamentally considers money more important than people. And that's what helps us define what the left should be, and which it's not now, which is actually the intention of its founders: an alliance between the working and poor people of all countries based on the common needs of all humanity, not just one privileged part of it, and least of all on the racial fantasy that any one part of humanity is born superior to another. Such a left in the Western world hardly exists. It is rotted from within under the hubristic delusion that so-called Western civilization entitles it to tell everybody else what to do. It is worshipped at that terrible altar where Mammon and Mars consummated their union. It has been rewarded by being sacrificed on that altar, and it will therefore be able to do nothing even for its own people, as we're now seeing in what the Biden administration is doing to the people of the USA. Peace calls for a global left that truly represents the working and poor people of the whole world, recognizes all of them as genuine equals, and places their common rights and their common needs above those of property owners and their profits. That's my definition of the left, and it was the definition of the founders. We've strayed from that path and we need to come back to it. Such a left is also the only path to peace. Educated by the struggles of our sisters and brothers of the South and the East, and in concert with them, and with due respect for what they have gone through and what they have achieved, I hope we can start building it. Thank you once again.